Good day, my name is Aljoy Magas from BSIT 3ABA and we are Group 6. And my members are Melody Butak and Mike Angelo A. Sumawang. And our topic is all about preliminary theories. So what is preliminary theories? Preliminary theories in the arena of competing ethical theories, they belong to those that are heavily criticized on account serious flaws that the scholar cannot help but recognize. Nonetheless, our frequent employment of these principles to justify an act as moral makes these theories worth discussing, and whether the words preliminary or finalists appropriately describe the classified theories will be left open to your careful scrutiny. Ethical relativism. So what is ethical relativism? Ethical relativism, this movement ethical principle rejects absolutism, which insists on the existence of universally acceptable ethical truths. Ethical relativism may be understood through these lines from Sir Richard Burton. There is no good, there is no bad, this be the whims of mortal will. What makes me will, that calls I good. What harms and hurts I hold as ill. They change with space, they shift with race, and in the various space of time, its vice has worn a virtuous crown, all good been banned or sin as crime. According to this formulation, context determines the nature of moral action. Hence, certain acts that are usually considered morally bad may be morally permissible under certain circumstances or exceptional cases. In some countries, the display of lewd and indecent materials is not considered immoral per se, hence pornography in the net is tolerated. In other countries, pornography is considered a violation of decency and morality, and hence frowned upon. This notion of relative morality also explains why in some countries censorship is legal, while in other countries censorship is frowned upon. Here's another example. We know for a fact that the Philippines has a very high computer literacy rate. This is a high demand for computer software and programs. However, the income level of Filipinos in general is not so high. Given this situation, one might say that those who purchase pirated software in a country like the Philippines are justified in doing so, or at least not as immoral as some might think. On the other hand, because piracy effectively cheats intellectual property owners of income from the sale of their intellectual property. In this case, computer software piracy is morally wrong. The act of piracy, therefore, will be discovered and moral or immoral depending on the set of standards used to judge the situation. Other thinkers refuse to accept arguments supportive of ethical relativism. They believe that all people of whatever color or race, religious denominations, or political affiliations should be subject themselves to norms or rules common to all humanity. Ethical relativism. So what is ethical relativism? According to Plato, one called ethical relativism as ethical irrelationalism. The search for knowledge, he said, is a search for the real, and the knowledge gained is absolute, universe, and objective. He considered good, which he described as absolute, as the final goal sought by all things in the universe.
Immanuel Kant is another philosopher who disapproved of relativism. Like other absolutists, Kant believed that there are universal rules that determine what is the right thing to do. rules devoid of ifs and independent of what people may individually or collectively desire to do. He called these rules categorical imperatives. Kant argued that there are universal ethical rules, truths that transcend time, space, culture, and other individual differences. Accordingly, what goes for one goes for all. Indeed, ethical relativism, take to the extreme, could expose moral choices to a million and one self-serving justifications. Ethical absolutism. Ethical absolutism asserts that there should be fixed or rigid factors in evaluating actions, fixed factors that are universal, constant, and therefore unchanging reasons for judging an action as good or bad, right or wrong, just or unjust, among other. As discussed earlier, relativism considers factors or reasons that vary depending on the context. Computer hacking, for example, will not be considered evil or bad per se by relativists. Such an act may be good in one case and bad in another context. There is no fixed evaluation of an action. Ethical absolutism simply argues that one must follow a consistent ethical standard, one that is universal in nature. Ethical absolutists would not consider an action bad in one sense and good in another. In doing this, ethical absolutists say you commit the fallacy of contradiction. All action must be black or bad, or white or good, and never gray or qualified at any given time. If computer piracy is wrong, or infringement of intellectual right and property is wrong, then the same should be so in all such incidents, no matter what the circumstance. Ethical egoism and ethical altruism. Ethical egoism and ethical altruism are two other principles of morality that we usually use to support certain ethical judgment. School of thought in defense of these theories date back to ancient times. Their modern roots, however, are traceable to Thomas Hobbes, a well-known English philosopher. In his work, The Leviathan, Hobbes casts light on ethical egoism by introducing the theory of motivation. According to him, what predisposes us to act in a certain way is determined by whether it is in an object of aversion or an object of desire. What would move you to pursue objects would be your desires. Aversions, on the other hand, motivate you to avoid certain objects. Objects and actions, according to Hobbes, have no intrinsic value. The assessment of their moral value hinge on how they are categorized. Objects of desire are labeled good, while objects of aversion are considered evil. Human beings are devoid of any genuine feelings of sympathy, benevolence, or sociability, which makes it unthinkable for them to prioritize the welfare of others over and above their own. For example, in order to get the position he wanted, Rayan fabricated stories about how Shiri's computer program has a lot of loopholes that cause problems affecting the mother server of the company's MIS department. Not satisfied, Rayan even circulated a libelous article to discredit Sherry. Because of what Rayan did, Sherry was transferred to a position less prestigious than her original job. Rayan was promoted as head of the MIS department. In the above example, what could possibly have prevented Rayan from doing what he did? From the point of ethical egoism, this would be one or both of the following. 1. His hear of sooner or later, what he did will be discovered to an untrue and hence could be a ground for him to be penalized. Or 2. His feeling of superiority over others, that is his high regard for himself, in upholding the truth and in projecting himself as a law-abiding citizen. Notice that both options are in Rayan's interest. Egoists believe that there is no such thing as pure altruism or the desire to promote the good of others. They believe that altruistic actions merely must self-interest. As Moritz Schlick of Vienna stated, all choices, altruistic ones considered, are determined by the immediate pleasure felt by the person doing it.
An egoist interpretation will argue that this is not so. Among the possible egoistic explanations of his action are: 1. He gets a feeling of satisfaction from being trusted by his friends. 2. It is pleasing to receive expression of gratitude and praise from friends with whom he had shared his program. He feels more comfortable sharing his own programs than being amazed by other people's intellectual creation in computing. For he fears disapproval by his friends. His act of sharing earns him a good reputation. All explanations point to that benefit that the computer whiz get from his seemingly altruistic act. Thus, this act is not truly altruistic. Nietzsche, in his work Transvaluation of Values, goes so far as to say that the cult of altruism is merely a particular form of egoism that regularly appears under certain psychological circumstances. Imagine the case of a university student who decides not to secretly install computer worms and viruses in the PC of his friends, enemy in class. Instead, he helps his friends design a very good program that gets the approval of the professor. The usual view of this case would be that the university student decisive action was made not for his action interest but for the welfare of his friend. On the other hand, the egoist will contend that the student foremost motive is actually his own self-interest. The benefit that the friend would get is only accidental or an accidental consequence of the student's selfish motive. Whether was his strong Christian faith that persuaded him to reject the creation of a destructive program in the form of a virus, or a terrible feeling of guilt that swayed him, that that fact is that over and above the friend's welfare, it was the satisfaction of his interests that the student cared about. Various thinkers have tried to debunk the egoist theory. The utilitarian, for instance, contend that altruism is feasible, that realistic. Minister. Defining morally good action as those that could bring about the greatest amount of happiness to the greatest number. The utilitarian argues that altruism is a moral responsibility. Each one of us has a sense of fairness that process us to rationalize our selfish action. Now try to imagine a world where everyone is egoistic. What do you think will such a world be like? Would we even have a such invention as computers in a such a world? Egoism portrays human being as terrible, self-centered. Such a portrayal is consistent with the idea that human beings are rational beings. Being rational means having the capacity to think and distorting with reason. Self-interest, on the other hand, seems to be a matter of instinct. When you act by instinct, there is a great probability that you did not think. Note that once you engage in the process of thinking, you acquired greatest control of your action. Aside from being rational being beings are rational beings. The sense of being part of a collective explains to some degree the notion of altruism. What harms the whole harms one. For the collective to function, the rights, freedoms, and self-interest of each member must be taken into account. In this sense, no one has absolute right for freedom. A person desiring to exercise a right of freedom must respect the rights and freedoms of others in order that society shall be maintained. Thank you for watching.